All right, welcome to our very last module, everybody. Congratulations on making it through the entire term. Okay, so in this one, what we're going to talk a little bit about is what if the apocalypse isn't coming, right? In the last module, we talked a little bit about what are the different political uses of this concept of apocalypse and all of that. But what I really want to look at here, and something we need to think about very carefully, is sometimes in some respects, people hope for an apocalypse or count on an apocalypse. But what if, however, that's not going to actually be the case, right? What if an apocalypse to fix everything or to wipe the slate clean isn't actually coming? Well, before we talk about that, I wanted to mention a couple things. One is whenever there is some sort of major catastrophe or cataclysm, this is also sometimes referred to as an opportunity, right? It's a cliche, the idea that a crisis is an opportunity. Well, one of the things we looked at in some of the readings and stuff for this section is if it's an opportunity, what is it an opportunity for, right? And we looked at sort of two different views of this. We looked at A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, who tries to make this argument that what actually happens in the cases of big disasters is not that people turn cannibal and start destroying everything and getting at each other's throats, but that they actually become more community oriented and make connections with the people around them and kind of make in what her argument is sort of a more true sense of community. And also in the article, This Is Not the Apocalypse You Were Looking For, you get this same kind of idea that actually what gets you through sort of a catastrophe, or whether that be a pandemic or whatever it might be, that it's actually altruism and cooperation that sort of gets you through, which is different than some of the things that we've seen over the course of over the course of this whole term. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is that when we're looking at Rebecca Solnit's work, I think we need to think about this and contrast it a little bit with the stuff in the episode of, or the movie we watched about the earthquake in Haiti, right? In Rebecca Solnit's work, she talks about people experiencing these disasters and actually it being sort of a very positive time in their life where they felt very kind of empowered. However, this may also be some coming from a particular position of privilege where when a disaster happens, it's really something still manageable. Whereas, like, say, compare that to the people in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, that disaster was clearly not going to be something they remember as sort of a positive experience where they felt like they were empowered, right? So something to kind of keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that if a crisis is an opportunity, we have to ask a little bit about who is it an opportunity for, right? Are disasters a chance for altruism and an opportunity to challenge unjust social orders, or are they invitations for mayhem and cannibalism, or are they actually opportunities for the powerful to become even more so? And of course, it could be all the above, but really, this last point about it being an opportunity for the powerful to become even more so is something that Naomi Klein really takes up in her work, where she talks about what she calls the shock doctrine or disaster capitalism, where during times of crisis and catastrophe, already powerful entities use it as an opportunity to kind of have a power grab and try to take even more power and also take control of more resources and more push through political programs that they couldn't when there isn't a catastrophe. Okay, the other thing that we have to think about here is that there's a whole logic around apocalypse that we have to sort of question a little bit. When we think about apocalypse, we think about it as being, kind of brought on because things are sort of falling apart. And we could kind of think about, are things really falling apart? Are they coming together more? Are we ramping up to an apocalypse? Is this sort of what's going on? And we have to kind of look at the current conditions in the world today and sort of analyze this a bit. Are we really, in 2022, we're kind of delinking more in terms of the different parts of the world economy. We've gone through this big pandemic, and the big question is that are people in this experience going to see the world more as sort of a cohesive whole, or sort of retreat back into their, more local kind of, smaller groupings, right? And I guess really one of the key things here is that when we see disease, poverty, environmental hazards, discrimination, oppression, or wholesale destruction, do we think of it as their problem or our problem, right? Do we kind of include the people who are victims of these things in the in who we think of as us and we, right? And then this is also important because if we think that we're just by ourselves, we may crave an apocalypse to sort of get rid of all of them and their problems. One thing, however, in this last part of this last module that I want you to consider is, what if, however, there isn't an apocalypse possible, right? In the sense of like something really changing and ending the world. Because the fact is that even in the largest disasters, there's always something left over. And those things that are left over then recombine and create new social systems, right? And one of the things that can help explain this is something called assemblage theory. And, you know, basically what assemblage theory sort of emphasizes is this idea that um, there are no endings or beginnings, only really recombinations of what is, right? So that even after a catastrophe, that may break apart a particular system, but that what you then have is this system that actually kind of comes back together in different ways. So there's a whole other video that I've created about assemblage theory and kind of how it relates to governance, which I'm linking here. You can check that out if you're really interested in looking a little more in depth into this idea that I think is actually really valuable for understanding how the world functions and why an apocalypse isn't in a sense possible, right? That this idea that you can't really have an end to everything because there's always something that kind of recombines and comes up and regrows in place of whatever was destroyed. But one of the things that kind of the short version of this in terms of assemblage theory is this idea that if the apocalypse isn't coming, what if we're not at the end? And also, what if a new beginning is not around the corner? What if we're in the middle of things? What if tomorrow we have to keep working on the same problems that we face today? What if tomorrow we still have to deal with the same political problems that we have today, the same environmental problems that we have today, the same social problems, the same personal problems, right? What do we do if there isn't going to be a divine thing that comes around and changes and fixes everything for us? And in a sense, that could be almost a more terrifying concept than the idea of apocalypse, where apocalypse is supposed to kind of fix things or get rid of all the confusion and the mess. What if instead we have to, as the author Donna Haraway puts it, have to stay with the trouble, day in, day out, right? This is an important question to think about, and there are really big political ramifications for this because so many people on both the left and right have this assumption that you can just change everything and get rid of other people that disagree with you and kind of remake society in the way that you would like to make it. And what if that's not actually possible? What if that even in a catastrophe, it recombines and the people who disagree with you are always going to be around? What if there isn't a big cleansing coming where all of your opponents are wiped away? Because more than likely, that is the way things are going to work. Okay. So, all right. So that's one point to sort of leave you here. But I have a couple other final points for the class. We all know the pandemic is hopefully winding down, right? I mean, we would like to think that perhaps this is basically over and that we can go into the fall semester and not have to wear masks again and all that business. But the big question is, what are we going to do kind of coming out of this? What social changes are going to happen? What kind of society do we want to try and shift and make after that? And the other key point here is that we have to recognize, of course, that even though we've been looking at all these types of death and stuff over the whole semester, of course, we are all going to die. That is just part of the human condition. And so one of the things you have to kind of ask yourself is, if that's the case, how is it that you want to live, right? Because the fact is that everybody's time here on Earth is finite, and also every social system is finite. And worlds change, and worlds in a sense that we've been talking about do kind of end and begin and change and shift. It does mean that there's not really a good reason to necessarily hold yourself back. It doesn't mean you have to be a jerk, but on the other hand, you should think a little bit about the fact that yes, we are living in a time where things are going to shift and change. Then they're going to recombine into other things, right? But what is it that you want both your personal life and your social life around you to look like? And sort of the last thing is that recognizing that change is inevitable. Natural change, personal change, social change. You should not assume otherwise. And hopefully, I hope that through looking at the things that we've looked at in this class, the space hazards, the earth hazards, the atmospheric hazards, things around nuclear energy and all that kind of stuff, and also cultures. I hope that through all of this, you've learned a lot about how the world actually works by learning about the natural hazards and all of that, but also the way societies function too, not just in cases of apocalypse, but really in other ways as well. And thank you for being in this class. I appreciate your time and your discussion questions and everything else. And good luck on the end of the term and the final exam. And that's it. That's a wrap.